Good afternoon. My name is Tom Simchak. I'm the Energy Storage Association's Director of Research and Programs. Thank you for attending today's StoragePLUS Network webinar on energy storage and natural gas. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on energystorage.org. Questions can be submitted at any time throughout the webinar via the chat box in your browser. Following the webinar, you'll receive a brief survey regarding today's topic and topics for future webinars. Your feedback will ensure that ESA continues to provide the highest value information to you and your organization. All meetings and teleconferences of the Energy Storage Association are held in accordance with our antitrust guidelines. We ask that you abide by these guidelines during today's webinar. The full guidelines are available in the members-only area of the ESA website. If you are not an ESA member and would like more information, you can reach out to my colleague Richie O'Neill. Membership includes free access to webinars like this one, among numerous other benefits. So please reach out for more information. Before we begin, I'd like to give you a brief update on upcoming ESA events. The ESA annual conference will be held in Phoenix, Arizona from April 16th to 18th. This is ESA's premier event and will bring together the energy storage community to focus on expansion, inclusion, and integration in the energy storage sector. We hope you'll be able to make it out for that. We've also have a packed webinar schedule coming up, which you'll find at energystorage.org. Then if you follow that to events. For example, next week we've got one on how energy storage can support resilience, but looking at it from a locational approach. So where siting energy storage can be particularly beneficial for resilience issues and how to look at resilience from a space and place-based point of view. We'll have Pacific Northwest National Lab speaking on that. This is the second webinar in our Storage Plus series. The Storage Plus Network examines how energy storage can improve extant energy sources through a series of webinars and issue briefs that highlight the important issues and bring together experts relevant to comprehensive planning across the sector as we develop modern energy systems. Today we'll hear about innovative coupling of energy storage systems and natural gas. Our speaker today is Kurt Waldner, General Electric's Energy Storage's Director for Strategic Marketing and Project Management. Kurt's responsible for overall lifecycle management of GE's energy storage and hybrid subsystem offerings, and he's had multiple roles over a 22-year career at GE, including turbine design, project management, LTSA productivity leader, and GM aeroderivative LTSA business. After Kurt's remarks, we'll open up to audience Q&A. You can ask questions via the chat box at any time, and we'll read those out for Kurt when we get to the Q&A session at the end. So thank you for attending today's webinar, and I will turn it over to Kurt. Kurt, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Thanks.
Okay, great. I'll start off with, not a storage guy for too very long. I'm happy to be here in storage, but I am a turbine guy and came to know of storage with the phrase peaker free by 23, and I started to wonder who was trying to kill the turbine business. And long story short, here we are. I really appreciate everyone joining this afternoon if you're on the West Coast this morning or wherever you are, and I look forward to seeing you at ESA in Phoenix. We'll have a booth, a very large booth, and we'll have a lot of people there to answer any specific questions that you might have. Let's continue on. Slide 3, just a quick agenda, and I guess I'll go through the pitch and the material and talk through it and look forward to questions at the end. I'll try and keep it to about 30 minutes and we'll get through some of these slides pretty quickly. We'll go a little bit outside in, GE's presence in energy storage, how we approach it, what we can do, just to give a little bit of background. I'll try and go quickly. Today's environment, which is absolutely fascinating and really changes day to day and week to week as we see governments and the climate change and the whole economics of storage and renewables changing the grid, changing what we get our power from. Absolutely fascinating. what I call the renewables conundrum, because there's some interesting dynamics going on as we add straight renewables, those in storage. I'm sure this is all kind of mother and apple pie, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. Then we'll get into kind of the heart of the matter with thermal hybrids. What are their benefits? What do we mean by them? And a few case studies. And then just some conclusions and next steps, because whether we've solved for today, we have to think about tomorrow. The dynamics of growing RPS beyond 10, 15, 20% into 60, 70, 80, 90 are fascinating, and some of the solutions we need aren't there. Some of us have ideas, and that's a great dialogue to have. So let's just jump in. Slide 4, slide 5. Just outside in. Obviously, energy storage is part of GE. We recently reorganized a little bit, and now we're more closely aligned with our renewables business, along with our grids, a piece of our grid solutions business, creating a world-leading renewables platform with presence in most countries, with service capabilities, with install base, and then obviously with the ability to work both across our gas business and our fossil-based business, the legacy portfolio, and our renewables business. Obviously, hybrids go beyond thermal hybrids, and we're involved in a lot of that, along with what we call a grid hybrid, which would be more classically standalone storage. They're all hybrids from the essence of improving the ability of the grid to use renewables and shift to clean sources. So if we continue on, just to make sure people understand GE's breadth in this space, these next couple of slides, would be classically considered an integrator, a full-service integrator. We bring together Tier 1 battery systems. We're actually fairly agnostic to the battery supplier, looking for next-generation improvements in cycle capabilities, design density, efficiency, and really effective at integrating different battery types beyond lithium-ion when the time comes and as that market grows. But obviously the tailwind is with lithium-ion. We do control battery management enclosures, obviously control platform, even beyond into the hybrid realm and into the plant realm to manage the entire system and optimize it. And then we have consulting services and software. And if you go to the next slide, again, not just the hardware, but the whole approach. How do you fit in your particular market? What are some of your challenges? Work with you on a business case to look at the cost benefits of storage or hybridization, planning, turnkey service, and obviously services are all part of the wrap. We try and bring a full solution to any customer who thinks perhaps that storage or hybridization works for them. And these days, it's hard to find customers who don't realize that this is going to be part of the portfolio going forward. And obviously that's very exciting for us. Really moving into today's environment, and as I said, and we use this slide a lot, you wouldn't recognize New York City in 10 years. In his case, we're talking about 1903 to 1913 with the advent of the automobile, and I'm from Detroit, so that was kind of revolutionary for us. It changed almost overnight, and I think what we see is the pace of change around the power grid is similar. The necessity of moving to renewables, the economics and advantages of moving to renewables is compelling. Depending on your political views and all that, we're not going to go there, but obviously we feel some urgency, many of us, to move and to move faster. But the pace of change is something like it was in New York City. Another slide, on slide 10, GE, obviously a lot of us in this business try and forecast what's going to happen. Everything we can see says that what was bought in the last 10 years on the left-hand side, changing to what's going to be bought in the next 10 years, and the slides needs updated a little 1 year, but look back, is a dramatic shift. And it's funny, and everyone who looks at this slide probably has a different impression. My impression, and no offense to anybody who's a coal fan, the 320 on the right-hand side for coal is too high. And I think it's compelling and challenging for those of us in the renewables and the storage industry to see, I don't want anyone to lose their job, but I would love to see coal go down, that we can really impact the use of fossil fuels, that we can make the whole grid a little bit greener. So it's funny, a lot of people say, well, that's a dramatic fall off, and I was just surprised the first time I saw this slide. It's not nearly as steep as I thought it would be. And some of the challenges and some of the discussion today is around that. you still need to handle seasonality and other aspects of renewables, and that's why we're all here. That's why storage and hybridization are the elixir to enable more renewables, because you're going to run into a heavy curtailment and still run short on windless, cloudy days. So continuing on, again, just emphasizing the rate of change we're in as we decarbonize, as we digitize. We have the opportunity of decentralizing rooftop solar, et cetera, microgrids, seeing islands, not need to import so much diesel anymore, and then electrification. The opportunity is if we can get a very high RPS, the pull to electrify will only accelerate, which will feed back and enable more storage, more renewables, and a greener grid and a greener entire power industry, inclusive of power for transport. Interestingly, as we model the go forward, and we'll get to this in a couple of slides, we don't actually see GE's models, and sure the models are different here and there, but I think generally we're also not seeing a real tail off in CO2. We see individual states and countries challenged with higher RPS and higher RPS. We're seeing not so much the impact on CO2, and we'll get that to a little bit. All of this, a little bit motherhood and apple pie, but all this leading to why are renewable hybrids and why are thermal hybrids so interesting. Some might even say those at the more adamant about 100% green, no carbon energy. Sometimes hybrids, thermal hybrids, gas turbine hybrids can take on a bad name. And I think in the long run, 2050 plus, maybe we move to something that's 100%. But I think there's an aspect of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, and to bridge to that future environment. So we'll talk about that. That sort of leads into and getting closer to the heart of the matter, and I hope I'm not going either too fast or too slow. But what seems to be a bit of a conundrum as we add renewables, what happens? And so on slide 13, here's the California duck, the duck that shows up in many areas much more than California. And as we all know, and to partly why we're all here, some of the problems with the duck during a day where storage plays, you see obviously what originally was more of a hump in the duck in the back as the sun gets hot and we start to turn on our AC at 2 and 3 p.m. Inverts, we get the belly of the duck, and classically, if every day was this day, it would be very easy to design storage to pick up the belly of the duck and push it to the neck and up onto the top of the head of the duck, and life would be relatively simple. But there's problems with that. That is a typical spring day, and I'm going to guess it's a typical sunny spring day. And if you're in California, that's more often than not, but not always. And so beyond the 4 things on the side, we know we have to handle the volatility, the occasional cloud. You've got quick changes, so you've got some shorter duration, minute and hour frequency and ramping. All of these things are well handled by short duration storage. But you also then run into, in the long term, as we grow RPS, you run into, well, that's spring. What about January? What about July? Solar efficiency falls off as it gets hot. Solar efficiency falls off as the sun doesn't get as high in the sky if you're in the northern climes. You get into very different cases of, well, I have a lot of solar and I have a lot of wind, but sometimes I'm going to run out of it because of seasonality or because of extended weather events. And so what you see is some pushback across the board that we can't handle certain high RPS in certain areas because we have to backstop that so heavily with dispatchable resources. And the question is, does thermal hybrids help that? And how do we today and tomorrow perhaps allow ourselves to blend the two, dispatchable high efficiency resources, clean high efficiency resources that are dispatchable with a predominantly renewables based grid? Do thermal hybrids help in that area? And of course, that's a rhetorical question. We believe the answer is strongly yes. Moving on, borrowing a few slides, and I'm remiss, I should acknowledge, GE's approach to thermal hybrids have long been in partnership with Wellhead Power Systems based out of California. I'm borrowing a lot of the information, some of the information that we've developed together and that they've developed as we show, and we'll talk about the EGT on the aero side. coming shortly here, but I do want to acknowledge their heavy intellectual bring what they brought to the table here: analysis, insight, engineering capability, and so on and so forth. So it's been a great partnership for GE to work alongside Wellhead. Here we're looking at just some examples, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, and I've already said, as you bring on variabilities, you bring on wind that can gyrate very quickly as the wind changes. These dots recommend change in over 10 minutes time on the far right here. You go up and down, so wind has a nameplate capacity, but you see that maybe you get over a year an average 20, 25, 30% nameplate capacity of wind, maybe a little bit better offshore, but within minutes, within hours, it can change dramatically. Same thing with solar. Sunny Arizona, 330 days a year, probably very predictable, but even a cloud can take a solar field down 70, 80, 90% very quickly. And so you get a lot of both short-term and long-term seasonality weather events, all of this playing a game with the grid system that's used to saying, I need this many megawatts, I'll turn this on, I'll leave it on, I know it's not going to change. You get a lot more dynamics. And you see then on the left then is also that right now everyone's relying and really projecting a heavy role of gas. The conundrum piece of this is, and it took me a little while to find this data, and I look forward to it, analyzing it over a longer time frame. In the lower right-hand corner, you see on a U.S. combined cycle gas turbine fleet that, at least anecdotally, but I know what GE's been doing with their fleet is upgrading the efficiency and introducing world-class efficient 60, 62% machines going live here in the U.S. So on a fleet that is only renewing, albeit not at a rapid pace as it used to, but renewing at a higher efficiency, the net heat rate of the plants that are running, generating 1 million gigawatt hours, the heat rate actually fell by just less than 2%. Interesting, as you improve the capability, the nameplate rating of your fleet of gas turbines, if you retire a few older 45, 50, 25, depending if they're open combined cycle, and you replace them with 40 plus open cycle or 60 plus combined cycle, and you end up actually decreasing or increasing the heat rate, decreasing the net efficiency of how those assets are running. And so it tends to feel a little bit like 2 steps forward as we increase the RPS, as we increase the net energy generated by renewables, and 1 step back, we actually undermine that benefit with running our gas turbines, and presumably a little bit, but not so much. I looked at the data. We run coal plants a little bit less efficiently. They're not as deemed as flexible as gas. You just actually undermine the benefit. So as the gas fleet capacity factor shrinks, which it necessarily will, you still have it being needed for reliability. You start it more, you ramp it harder, you ramp it more often, and in the end, you're actually giving some of that that CO2 benefit back as you do that. If we continue on then to 15, this is a little bit detail analysis. You might have seen this if you're neck deep in the ISO regulatory regime. Generically, as I just said, you run renewables, you need more reserves. Many times that's bringing units online at less than full capacity off their design points, more ramping, or more starts. All of that tends to pull back on the greenhouse gas reduction, and you have kind of a dynamic cycle here of targeting higher RPS, but you're dealing with seasonality and the volatility. You sub-optimize your gas fleet, and you actually don't get the greenhouse gas reduction you should. CAISO, in an analysis they published in January, projected out the growth as they run the RPS, I think 60% in 2030. Excuse me. They actually start to see, not from the accelerated retirement of their gas fleet, and they're very vocal, God love them, they're very vocal about moving to 100%. There's a lot of passion there, and sometimes mentioning even the word gas turbine is them's fighting words. But if they only allow their gas-fired assets today to sunset based on a 40-year life, they actually start to run into not so much total capacity capability, but they run into load following and operating reserves to handle how they predict the renewables-based portfolio would impact. So you run out of reserve margin in certain instances because you run into very low availability. I believe it was 7 p.m. on a certain day in 2030 that showed you simply won't have enough, and you'll start to suboptimize. You'll start to pulling back on who can run. You have to do not elective demand response, but forced offline. These sorts of things. And again, that is not talking about early retirement. And there's a lot of people pushing for very early retirement, immediate retirement of a lot of gas and fossil assets. This is just natural retirement. So if you were to accelerate that retirement, you're really going to run into problems. Again, same thing. But I think this is also interesting, and I really, not being from California, and you really appreciate how California leads the way. The reality of compensating for renewables is that a lot of the plants that currently do that, a lot of peaker plants are actually located in disadvantaged communities. And so when these units are called upon to cycle even more, you not only pull back on the greenhouse gas emissions benefit, but you also actually introduce more criteria emissions, NOx, CO, and whatnot. And so you kind of even more further undermine the benefit. We need to come up with different ways of approaching that. And that, with no further ado, is where hybrids come in, 17 and now 18. And again, credit, Wellhead and G worked with Gridwell to do this analysis to look at if we hybridize, and here we'll get into the details here, but really it means in a behind-the-meter configuration, a relatively small battery with a open cycle turbine, and basically an aeroderivative, very fast start, very flexible turbine to begin with, or with a combined cycle gas turbine and we'll show the benefits of those, but again, not a one-for-one matching of the megawatt, but in the neighborhood of 20%. Because of the flexibility of those assets, and again, remember the gap was in load following, the gap was in ramping, not in overall generation capability. Whereas the problem of retirement without hybridizing on the left-hand side of this bar chart starts to introduce reliability concerns. If you hybridize a portion of that fleet, you can actually, in this case, the way the analysis rolled, you can actually use less standalone storage with this flexible gas, and you won't have the reliability that you have. In addition to that, you can then start to accelerate the hybridization of the other resources. So you get your cake and you get to eat it too, and you actually need less storage. Now, you could turn this slightly in another direction and say, I'll take more storage, I'll take less gas. And that again gives you that capability, because your super flexible hybridized assets are providing the grid ancillary services that you need in quantity as you get RPS 30, 40, 50, 60. And then again, this analysis is about a 60% RPS in 2030. And I said before, like these starts, and you see on the right-hand side, 940 starts a year is a lot. It causes, obviously, economic impact on the units. It causes emissions, criteria emissions, plus greenhouse gas. This is kind of like your cake and eat it too. You're introducing storage, but you're targeting a small amount of that storage in the hybridization, making these assets flexible so you don't have to necessarily turn them on to give you the spin reserves, for example, with the peaker units. So if we go to the next slide, very quick to summarize, if we hybridize the existing peakers in these disadvantaged communities, because that's predominantly where they're located, those disadvantaged communities tend to be at critical grid interconnects and ideally located, as opposed to turning them on and off even more, they become, and Mikura and CAISO was willing to accept. So there's a little bit of communication with people like the CAISO and the PUC to say that asset is actually a spinning reserve asset because it's immediately online, it's synchronized to the grid, it's ready to go. The fact that it's not physically burning anything, I should see as an advantage. It's not classically spinning. Classically spinning meant metal was spinning. There's no need for that. The battery covers the beginning. We'll get into that in a little bit of detail. So the peakers actually run significantly less, but are there providing spin reserve. Many peakers would start up, hold at minimum power, to provide spin, but shut down without ever generating it. That's a lot of emissions for no value, no direct value, if you can do that same thing without burning gas. Complementarily, the hybridization of the current combined cycle gas turbines, which is a little bit of a newer area we're looking at, you increase the ramping capability of the entire resource, and you can pull back the number of units providing that service and use either shut those units down if you're California, or use those assets, those efficient assets closer to the design point or on their design point, and turn off something else, turn off a coal plant. So again, the metrics here, and this is specifically for California, for CAISO, one hybrid peaker, 15 to 30,000 metric tons annually, simply by not running in spin. And it's not just that plant, it's the impact in the surrounding plants that other units aren't held back for reserve. They get to roll up to their design points, and you get that high efficiency combined cycle. A peaker running, obviously is fast and responsive, but it's not in combined cycle. It's not nearly the efficiency. If you hybridize 22, California, and again, this is specific to California, in their goals, maybe a little ahead of the curve, but I think where we're going in general, you can allow coal, the rest of the coal, and 5,500 megawatts of gas plants to retire, and still in 2030 with a 60% RPS meet all the reliability needs that we can argue how important it is to reduce GHGs, but on an individual basis, when the lights go out, there'll be a lot of kicking and screaming and pushback to further greening up. So we have to deliver both. We have to deliver reliability, we have to deliver CO2 reduction, criteria emissions reduction, and we have to do it cost effectively. So let's keep going. Finally, so we've kind of worked outside in terms of the challenge with renewables and how the benefits are seen, but let's get back down into the weeds. Hopefully your interest is piqued. What is a thermal hybrid as it comes from GE? Slide 21 kind of put the configuration on a sort of a schematic. It's a proprietary hybrid control system, takes a relatively small 10 megawatt here, if this is the Aero LM6000, the GE LM6000, 49 megawatt unit nominally with a 10 megawatt BESS, so about 20% power combined behind a hybrid control system, and basically that runs the entire plant, that provides then spinning reserve or frequency regulation, frequency response, load following, and voltage support. Not necessarily all at the same time, but based on if we don't get picked up for spin, we can do frequency response. So in effect, this plant that has been hybridized, we'll show a picture of it, but two of them in California, is always doing something of value, almost always doing something of value to the grid. Some of the capabilities, and I winnowed this list down because it's such a long list, but and again, through not only the turbine, the adding of the energy storage system, but also from optimizing the turbine and the SCR on the back of the turbine, the whole plant is basically capable of sitting at 0 megawatts. It can be off, but here, and even if we turn it on, we can run it at 0 megawatts and hold emissions. Tmax doesn't change. The commitment time is 0. We can have power nearly instantaneously on the grid, just like when the request for spin comes. The unit only needs to start to ramp to meet basically a linear profile to full power in 10 minutes. Here we actually, from the gas turbine side, accelerated the start time down to 5 minutes. And so that actually, the benefit is it decreases the size of the battery. So we don't need a bigger battery on a 10-minute start. 5 minutes works better. It costs you nothing to commit to that. So you're basically providing spin without causing any marginal cost to provide it. Everything's managed. Both the battery system and the GT are managed by the hybrid control system. That's inclusive of the state of charge. Interesting in a conversation with the CAISO, and for those of us who worked with hybrids with different ISOs, there tends to be an initial reaction that the ISO wants to control every single asset. It was refreshing that this particular individual CAISO actually said, I'm actually glad I don't have to worry about the state of charge. I'm glad this is all really viewed to them as a singular hyper turbine, if you will, an extremely capable turbine, just because from the factors you see here, because they don't have to worry about the state of charge management, are relatively small. There is some concern in the CAISO about managing all these batteries and making sure they're charged, whether there's contingency events, can they really be relied on? This one being a behind-the-meter application, there's no concern about the state of charge. Basically, the turbine handles that. Small trickle charge when the GT is not running, but if the GT is running, the system knows that as it shuts the GT down, it leaves the state of charge of the storage system where it wants it. It's all AGC control, automated response. It's very precise, so the gas turbine is reasonably precise itself, but the integrated control lets it be even more precise by compensating with the control. The whole plant output is seamless from an ISO perspective, from a grid operator perspective. They don't see the individual pieces. They don't see the state of charge management. They simply see a highly predictable, highly responsive gas turbine, give them exactly what they want when they want it. So in effect, you get all the benefits of storage and you get the benefits of the gas turbine, and then you put them together and you get the synergy that's even beyond that. So there's nothing that's taken away from the ability of a battery to do frequency regulation or frequency response, or the turbine to provide power, but you put them together and you get something that the grid really has to be told and shown that they really need it, they really want it, that they can have it. One of the things we found out is people don't know that they can have this type of product, and such it never gets into their RFPs. They don't ask for it. So there's a lot of education going on, which I think we all feel across this space of these products are now available. They can do this, meaning you can have higher RPS. The lights aren't going to go out when the wind stops blowing, so you can't watch TV. Moving on to slide 22, really, again, summarizing that synergy. You could be an LM6000 on the left-hand side. You don't have contingency reserve. You're not instant on. You can't really do high-speed frequency regulation. The system's too slow. You can be the best, but of course then the best is relatively small and very cost-effective because of that. But there's a lot of things that a standalone BESS can't do. Can't be looked at from the grid as being reliable beyond a certain point in time because it's not a generation system. It's simply a bring it in, hold it, bring it back out for a finite period of time, finite amount of energy. But you put them together, and where sometimes you have red and red, then you actually get green. So you get just a synergistic effect from these things that both SoCal Edison and both CAISO have really loved about the two sites we have operational in California for a couple of years now. And you can see very fast. Again, all of this leverages our modular technology, very fast to install. We've learned from the first few applications to bring the cost down, to bring the speed to install up, the repeatability, and really get to be able to do this very quickly. Very low land. It's designed to fit at land-restricted spots. We've actually improved. The picture I showed earlier was actually an older design. We've actually made that very modular, leveraging the reservoir platform, so we can get a lot of small number of containers we can bring in and hybridize a site relatively straightforward. So just to go a little bit then from the peaker into the combined cycle, and again here we're not talking about units that are typically offline. You could do a peaker on an open cycle frame turbine. GE offers 10-minute upgrades, so you can get a reasonable peaking benefit, much like the aeroderivative I just showed you. But when you have a combined cycle unit that's online, the advantage is actually to turn that entire combined cycle, the gas turbine being reasonably fast, the steam turbine, because of the steam lag cycle, you really don't get as fast a response on that. So the load following capability of a combined cycle unit is typically limited to the gas turbine portion, if that much. When you add a small battery, you can actually eliminate the steam turbine lag, the turbo lag, and you can make the whole plant very responsive and very capable of load following. So more ramp rate, more accuracy, less wear on the turbo machinery. You see a case down low, a unit just moving around and around over, I believe that's 1,300 minutes. If I could do math, I could tell you how many hours that was, but it's too much pressure. But you see the turbine moving around a whole lot during the day to compensate, and also moving a whole lot in small instances. So the whole system can move more effectively with hybridization. And again, listening to the customers, the community around these turbines, and the ISO all tout the benefits. we really think that when we're getting the education of the markets that this product is available, we see the uptick in interest. We see slowly tariff structure starting to change. They're starting to get into IRP models and to show the benefits of what a relatively small battery can do to augment a turbine and actually make that turbine's value present, but actually makes its CO2 contributions significantly less. Kind of getting into a little bit of wrap up, I'll just cycle through some of the capabilities again, maybe just to drive them home. The challenges of efficient integration of this variable generation. We really don't want to build 90% new gas for every 100% of 90 megawatts of gas for every 100 megawatts of solar we put in. But in effect, I've seen statistics that harsh that the reliable capacity factor, not on an annualized basis, but in certain periods, is low enough that you end up with that type of build out, and that's just not going to be cost effective. Flat load growth, so we're not seeing the need. If we put in renewables, we should actually see fossils come out as they naturally retire or get accelerated, but we're seeing that the ancillary services pull forward and the contingency services pull forward and drive more build. That's contingency. Reduce emissions, again, that conundrum we see actually fossil plants necessarily may be increasing emissions because of their compensation they're doing to the grid. More starts, more spin, and that can be pulling full throttle combined cycles off back to 80 or 90%, and that's high efficiency that's wasted if we have to turn on something else, an older open cycle turbine, for example. Okay. If we keep going, then we'll cycle through what's available on our website. But again, the hybrid thermal, you can do basic battery things like synthetic inertia, frequency response. Again, you're backed by that state of charge. It's always being managed by the system. Contingency reserve, improved operations. One by one, then on slide 26, frequency response. To the extent of the unit at 10 megawatts, you can do 10 megawatts of frequency response up and down, and this is what these units in California do quite a bit. And again, you can do this with an aero, an AGT. You can do it with a thermal hybrid. It's your choice. If we move on, this is actually a slide that shows the startup of the system in the lower left there. The storage, the green line, comes on immediately and meets that spin requirement. This particular requirement as it exists in California. The turbine comes on very quickly and picks up the load such that you get the green line going into the blue dotted line, and that lets you ramp down the storage. And so the amount of power, you need is at 10 megawatts. These are actually only 4 megawatt hour systems. So it's actually very small system for the benefit in the ancillary services space that it actually brings. Alternatively, if the turbine's online, you can do a lot of regulation without moving the turbine around, subcycling it, which will both do emissions and ultimately cycle the turbine and potentially create a little bit more maintenance. The battery itself can smooth that out dramatically, letting the turbine move less and less frequency, less harshly. So there's a whole bunch of different things we can do here. I think we're really just still starting to expand them. Some of the other things we do with, say, thermal units, we do black start. We'll talk about a case study on that. And that black start then is available, but if you're online, you can then take that black start unit and do other grid services. So much like generic storage, this concept of rate stacking is really preeminent with a hybrid, and the key is to show and demonstrate all the benefits these things can bring. Just a couple case studies, and we'll wrap, and I'm going to be pretty close to my 30 minutes, which is amazing. This is actually the picture of, I believe this is Center in California with SoCal Edison. It's been a privilege sharing the stage with SoCal Edison and visiting them on this site. The way they speak of this site, how it's delivered even more than they expected, is really pretty exciting. But this unit actually runs a lot less in terms of thermally burning fuel, and it's in a disadvantaged community. And you get a lot less starts, a lot less criteria emissions, and the units around it have run more efficiently, have been able to run up as this unit provides the spin instead of, say, combined cycle pulling back for spin in certain cases. So been very successful, been COD a little over 2 years now, and performing extremely well. Realizing we're maybe a little bit redundant here, but again, 50 megawatts of a spin reserve for contingency. That's gas-free until you know you need it, and then you commit it. 25 megawatts up down of high-speed regulation, voltage support. It's all integrated. It's all transparent to the ISO. Again, for those who have been in some of these conversations, convincing an ISO that they should just consider this as a super capable turbine is actually a bit of a challenge. There's a tendency to want to control. So we work very hard to show that you don't need to worry about it. It's a very small battery. It's really just a super turbine. Reduced thermal stress and zero fuel emissions, doing all these cases. This is available online if you want to investigate a little bit further. Excuse me. It's interactive, and so you can dig a little bit deeper and see a little bit more of what the system does. Just some quotes. You don't have to take it from me. CAISO, looking at what they need, and I hope this sort of reflects. You can read it, but they'd like to see more things like this. And so there's a lot of work going on to continue to supply the information they need so that they can get to the RPS they need without taking on a tremendous cost and potentially not even making it. The other application is the Imperial Irrigation District, that not only provides grid services but also provides black start support for a frame turbine. And so and those weren't necessarily done all at the onset. I think we added the black start capability a little bit later. And so the key with these hybrids is you never really even know all the examples that you can use with them. And again, in this case, it's a high power system, low energy. The only thought I would, in a quote from them on slide 34, tremendous value that they get out of this system, and love to do more with them. So again, I'm just conclude with next steps, and then we'll certainly open for questions. Only feel like I've talked to myself for the last 40 minutes, but a lot of benefits beyond the plant, benefits in communities, benefit in GHG and criteria emissions, local resource adequacy, incredible flexibility gained from a very small adder of a relatively small battery compared to the system, and yet you can actually burn less fuel, get more out of that system by having that battery instead of running the turbine just to have it in reserve, and very, very cost competitive. Naturally, we try and think not only of today but of tomorrow, and this slide kind of just an evolution of moving from a fossil-based fleet. And you might, if we reverse this slide and filled in the upper right-hand corner with renewables, we'd see that's where the renewables penetration comes. And we see thermal assets historically providing the bulk of the grid. As we start to hybridize them, we enable fewer thermal assets and fewer thermal assets running. But we do increase the value of some thermal assets. As we add storage down the road, you can envision that for the contingency events, the seasonality and some coin the trays that I think will get very popular here, the dark doldrums where we don't have the sunlight and we don't have the wind, that's going to be the real barrier ultimately. If we've hung on to a reasonable slate of high efficiency combined cycle gas turbines that are actually now, and we're speaking here 2030, 2040, 2050, 2060 maybe, depending on where you live, and we generate renewable natural gas, we generate hydrogen, we take excess curtailment, which to some extent is inevitable, and we use that to produce RNG or more likely hydrogen, or however the economics work out. We can then feed that back and then run even more clean and maybe potentially perfectly clean combined cycle turbines at high efficiency, in which they only need to manage the average load, and they feed the storage systems that would normally have been fed by renewables. They're now fed by a replacement system of energy, where it's not renewables, now it's baseload gas turbines, and that energy is actually shaped by the turbines. So I leave you with a cartoon, two cartoons. So this is the second one on slide 38. We're really just trying to paint a picture to show that when you add storage and when you add storage and hybrids and you increase the value but lessen the impact of gas turbines ultimately, they then become, in the long run, as storage increases, storage gets cheaper, they become the backbone until we develop longer term, very, very cost-effective long-term storage, which I'm sure we're going to see a lot of that in conceptual form at ESA. They become a very effective way to get very high RPS and hold some assets back, not to the peak demand, but to the average demand, less the reliable renewable capabilities. Then they can populate, generate their energy, shape that with storage, and you can have RPS. You know, I don't have the great models yet. It's another thing on my plate. But you can have RPS well above 60, 70, 80% when you have a backbone of clean combined cycle working with your storage, so you don't have to have a lot of peaking and a lot of excess assets that have very low capacity factors. So covered a lot of ground. I hope that's been helpful. Tom, I would open it back up to you for questions. I guess I ran a little over, but hopefully that was beneficial.
No, it was perfect. Thanks so much, Kurt. That was a really insightful look at of what can be done with storage combined with natural gas systems. Reminder to everyone that you can submit questions via the chat box. So please, we'll get started here on the questions that have already been submitted, but get your questions in and I will read them out to Kurt. So to start out with, from Peggy Ip, how has the operation for spinning reserve affected the degradation of batteries? Is that something you pay attention to?
Actually, we do. We don't see, relative to the size of the battery, a ton of throughput. I just don't have the data in front of me. Obviously, if you're really doing very active frequency regulation, using a lot of the net throughput of the battery, multiple cycles a day, you will see some accelerated degradation. I don't have the statistics from center, but we've also continued to optimize. Based on the capability of the turbine, we've actually been able to lower the state of charge a little bit, and that benefits the standing degradation of any lithium-ion system. The more charge you leave in it, typically you increase the degradation rate. I can try and look in the data. Again, it's been 2 years. That if we have the capacity tests, but I don't believe the total throughput on a daily basis when these are in frequency equates to multiple cycles per day. So I don't think we're feeling a lot of accelerated degradation from the economics and working with SCE. We certainly believe it's cost effective to do that. But yeah, you're going to use a frequency. You're putting energy through. You are going to add some degradation there. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Our next question from Mike Berlinski. In addition to education, what's needed to get these hybrid resources operating in other regions outside of California?
Well, education's first, so you already took that one off my plate. I think it's more than just education. The process has been very enlightening for me, and I do tip my hat here to Wellhead and the hard work that they've also put in, along with you saw maybe Gridwell Consulting, CISA, California, trying to make sure we're showing the benefit, we're showing how it works at all the stakeholder level, doing economic analysis, doing reliability analysis, running IRPs, which I need to learn how to do because they keep doing them for us, but running IRPs, running another IRP to show the benefits, and then lo and behold, the person you're trying to educate pops up and says, hey, I have a problem, when CAISO published this in January, and you're kind of like, you want to say I told you so, but I've learned in my career you never say I told you so. You say, oh, I have a solution to your problem, and you kind of have to wait sometimes for the aha moment because it's really hard. It's really hard necessarily to tell somebody. And then there's also the fact that the stakeholders aren't all coming at you with the same understanding. So the stakeholders in this arena, as opposed to working just straight with a utility that's deciding what they want to build for more power, you're dealing with many stakeholders who don't all want to walk through the data and understand the reality of sometimes having a little bit of gas goes a long way to getting a lot of CO2 out. And so we're navigating that. It's no small feat. The other one is having the ISOs recognize that micromanaging all these assets is something they just can't do. And the tariff structures to charge a battery that's not behind the meter aren't there, and I don't see them being there very effectively to do what this does to create a spin asset. It's just too complex, and that was reinforced by the gentleman at CAISO. So hope that started to get at your question.
Yeah, great, thanks. A little bit related, a second question from Peggy Ip. How do you think the value pencils out without the ancillary services market like you have in CAISO?
Actually, that's one of the. If you don't have an ancillary services market, if you mean the level of spin differential, then let's be honest. Some people might say, well, you've sold a couple of these. Where are the rest? Where are the ones in NISO or COT? Part of the problem is the tariff structures, and the reason we build power plants in the first place. Yeah, a few are built for merchant, but others are based on PPAs or quasi-PPA structures that give the financiers some guarantee of getting a payback, not just 2-3 years of merchant risk. So spin to non-spin differential, excuse me, creates a merchant risk to do this. It's still attractive, but sometimes customers 6-7 years out, they don't believe in the difference between spin and non-spin. I think we saw PJM had some collapse in their capacity market, but those gaps in the ability to shift here from spin to non-spin to spin create merchant risk, and it's hard sometimes to get financiers to do that. So you have to create a tariff structure that lets the grid have what it needs, and not expect it necessarily to happen based on merchant. So it's case by case, but if it's a straight up merchant, it's been a little bit challenging. And we see like 4-hour RA for standalone storage. A lot of attention to doing that for the duct, the easy discussion about shifting the belly of the duct. But the ancillary services has been a little bit slower to gain the insight and the regulatory changes to facilitate what's needed. To do these efficient ancillaries, and you're still doing it the old way with 80% combined cycle load with 20% reserve for spin, which is just not very efficient.
Great, thanks. Our next question comes from Chad Dixon. Can you expand on the challenges you've faced with ISO integration? Are those challenges with interconnection, market participation, both, or other issues?
I think, again, going off the last question, the integration with the two units that are operational was straightforward, but getting the tariff structure in place and it was not, I won't say it was simple. It was a lot of hard work to educate that this in fact is doing exactly what a spin asset would do, and the resistance to change. But from there, it really becomes the tariff structure. First and foremost, to have the backstop of the financials, to have the grid procure what it needs under some type of PPA or at resource adequacy or something, as opposed to merchant risk. Because if you all go after the merchant risk, you always run the risk of, well, everyone piled on and went after that merchant market, and then they collapsed it. So getting the ISOs and it's not most of the ISOs, they're the kind of the neutral grid operator, getting the PUCs and the regulatory commission and the stakeholders to recognize these things do require tariff structures typically to support. Not many people build much based on merchant risk, especially in this changing world. It's all based on ITC, PTC for renewables. There's nothing similar to that for this particular product.
Great, thanks. Next from Tatiana Chiku. When pairing storage with peakers or combined cycle gas turbines, is frequency regulation the only revenue application, or have you looked into energy arbitrage or extra capacity, i.e. increase of nameplate capacity available if interconnection allows?
Thank you for that question, because as we developed this cartoon on the last slide, it's the point that's not coming out, and it's this concept of no regrets. currently, you're seeing California move aggressively to support energy arbitrage, and again, the belly of the duck shifting, 4-hour RA, that's all there. These plants, there's absolutely no reason they can't start off in the ancillary space, and as we have a product to allow flexible expansion of duration, go after the merchant market and the arbitrage market. And again, it depends on the tariff structure and where you are and the value of the peak versus trough of price differential. Grow that system up from a 30-minute system to a 1, 2, 3, 4-hour system. And the beauty of that is typically if you're charging from the grid, it means you're charging from renewables. It means you're not using the turbine. And so again, depending on regulatory requirements, you should be able to leverage that interconnect, land, permit, O&M staff, the interconnect, all of that, and do energy arbitrage while the turbine's there as backup. So thank you for that. We're obviously not done with this slide and demonstrating that in the long run, this concept of having turbines, efficient combined cycle gas turbines as your backup is because your storage system on site is now more of a 1-to-1 4-hour system, and it can be charged by renewables 300 days of the year, and it can be charged along with the other storage systems around these plants by baseload operation of 60+% efficient turbines. Again, concept, and I really need to get some time to work on some modeling here, the concept that renewables supply the bulk of the grid, but on days when they don't, baseload combined cycle does, and the storage is actually the thing that shapes and matches gen to load, regardless of if the source is renewables, gas, or some thing in between. Then you really go back to my first statement, peaker free by 23. It might not be by 23, but you can really see where open cycle turbines and their relatively poor efficiency are no longer necessary. So thank you for bringing that up, because obviously it's a little bit of a non-intuitive, but yes, definitely we see ancillaries today, energy shifting and arbitrage in those longer power energy applications tomorrow.
Great, excellent. We had a question from Pramod Kulkarni, who is wondering if manufacturers' warranties are affected by hybridization.
Meaning the turbine? The batteries carry their warranties, yeah. And the batteries aren't really being effectively used any different than they were designed for. The batteries all come with maximum charge rates, maximum discharge rates, thermal capabilities, and so they're eminently warrantable. And as we tried, if the question was on turbines, and it's not, but if anything, these turbines, it's kind of wrapping the turbine in a little bit of bubble wrap. It softens up life for them.
Great. So are you seeing reduced O&M and that kind of thing with the gas turbines then?
Then I have to be careful because I work for GE. No, the reality is these particular peakers, this has been recorded, okay. And these peakers have actually simply just run less. These arrows are designed to cycle, so we believe, just by the laws of physics, that changing thermal loads, changing operational loads inevitably slows down the deterioration, but they were designed for that anyways. But again, in this case, the turbines are providing grid support without even running, so their actually operational hours are down. So for sure, on a fixed calendar basis, the O&M cost of those turbines is down, and it's actually down dramatically. We think that combined cycle turbines will see a benefit from not so many load swings, but they'll probably run actually maybe a little bit more, and so I think it'll be a little bit in the noise, but all in all, the physics suggest it should be beneficial.
Great, thanks so much. Well, that brings us to the top of the hour. Sorry to those whose questions we weren't able to get to. So, Kurt, thank you once again for joining us. That was a really great presentation. Really great to hear your perspective also in the Q&A. Thanks to those who submitted questions. Thanks to all of you who joined us here today. Before we conclude today's webinar, I'd like to remind everyone about ESA's annual conference in Phoenix, Arizona from April 16th to 18th. Registration there at the link you can see on your screen, and the hotel room block remains open. So hope you can join us to talk about these sorts of issues. Great bench of speakers on that. Kurt will be there. I'll be there. Everyone who's exciting you want to meet to talk about energy storage with will be there. If you have any questions regarding any upcoming events or webinars or ideas regarding topics to cover later in the year, please email them to us, education@energystorage.org. And with that, thanks so much. Thanks, Kurt, and hope everyone has a great afternoon. Goodbye.